And welcome everyone to another episode of the Mind Sculptors podcast. I am your host, Callahan, and this week we are here for, I guess you could say part two. It's not really part two, but for the Commander 22, or what is, they're calling it New Capenna Commander set review. Joining me today is, again, our favorite Canadian, and I'm gonna say this anytime any of the Canadian guests are on the show.
I thought you meant it.
I'll say this.
I was the number one.
You're my favorite Expo. Isn't that what Montreal's baseball team was? The Expos?
Was, yeah. Just rubbing it in.
Yeah. But is my good friend Pongo. Pongo, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Glad to be here as always.
Yeah, fun. And for the first time in a minute is Fenix is joining us again here from Lincoln, where it has been just raining for the past 5 days.
It's been doing that.
But other than the rain, how are you doing today, my good friend?
Oh, I'm doing pretty great. I don't know if I've ever been on one of these for the actual set review.
No,
I just put cards on the lists.
Yeah.
And talk about spoilers. So
yeah, you're always there in spirit.
Yeah.
We always have your notes there. So this is really exciting because for those of you who don't know, for the back end of how we do the set reviews, is our set reviews are almost always a document that either Cobblepot or Fenix, and recently it's been Fenix, makes. And Fenix will just dump anything that looks remotely interesting on it.
If I think people will talk about it or have opinions on it, I put it on there.
And then Pongo and I go through it, and we're just like, no, yes, no.
It's very much like a first pass at everything that we then filter.
So
there's some noise there. It needs to get filtered out.
Do you guys remember last week we were talking about Ledger Shredder and that it was a very good card? And I bought mine from, Card Kingdom. Bought a playset for $3. And I would like to show you guys now. We'll see how well this ages. Here's $40 that I acquired for $3. It's
pretty sweet.
Get your Ledger Shredders while you can, boys and girls. They are selling like hotcakes.
Yeah, smash that affiliate link.
Yeah, smash that affiliate link. Like we said, we have a affiliate link for TCG players. So you can go down there, order cards, and we get a little bit of kickback from that. Also, if you want to also help support the show, head on over to patreon.com /the Mind Sculptors, where you can learn all you need to know about the various ways you can support us there. So without further ado, we're recording this on Thursday night. And so I genuinely want to get this in under 2 hours because I'm going to see Doctor Strange tonight. So hopefully we don't get another 3-hour one. So the first card on our list is, we've got some of these white cards here, is Bennie Bracks Zoologist, which is a 3 colorless and a white legendary elf druid that is 3 power, 2 toughness, has Convoke, and it says at the beginning of each end step, if you created a token this turn, draw a card. So, obviously, Pongo, is this a Najeela card?
Of course you would ask. I didn't even have it on my radar, and naturally you would ask. No, this is not a Najeela card. Spoiler.
Is it an on-fire garbage can? Or is it?
It is not quite an on-fire garbage can. So it's actually a really shockingly powerful card. I'm just not sure that it really has a home in, any cEDH deck really at the moment. Theoretically, some mono white deck doing stuff with tokens might want it. Like Adeline, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the commander that makes tokens. The biggest issue is that to fully realize the power of this card, you really want to be like consistently making tokens even on other people's turns. And so I just don't know that there's enough cards to enable that that are good enough to play in cEDH. Whereas if you're playing this in a lower power format, you can build around that, and he's a really powerful draw engine in mono white when you actually build around him. So yeah, really, really awesome card. You know, the Convoke to have him essentially potentially be completely free, and also be completely free like as the game progresses if you have to recast him.
Convoke on a mono white commander is like hot.
Yeah,
because like, especially something that mono white does fairly well is create like soldier tokens. Right. So it feels like it's something that really fits what it does and takes advantage of what it does very well.
Making tokens on other people's turns is not that hard. It's just that there's not that many cards that we would play in cEDH that do that. There is Smothering Tithe, right? And so, like, obviously with him and Smothering Tithe, that's sweet. But, like, can you think of any others that, like, you would want to play?
It's like Oketra's Monument. And Oketra's Monument is actually really gross with this card. It's like, okay, so then you're stuck playing a bunch of flash creatures.
That's the issue, yeah.
And then at what point do we end up as, like, worse Ifara? Yep. Almost is, like, the concern that I have.
Yeah, I do think, though, that this card theoretically could get better in the future.
It just needs one good card to be printed, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh.
I think it needs more than one, because I think, especially in mono white, you need like a certain density to make up for the lack of consistent access to pieces. But I would expect to see a lot of this card in casual. It just, it can drop to 4 cards a turn cycle. Like, pretty insane.
Yeah, I can't think of any, honestly, I can't really like think of anything that would make me want to play this in the 99 of pretty much any deck, unless the commander itself was doing something like making
the commander has to make tokens. Yeah, exactly. So theoretically,
you could play it in the 99 of Jared, the one that makes the Rhino tokens.
Yeah, but that only does it on its own turn. So it's still the same issue.
Well, you know, I'm doing what I can. I don't play casual EDH. We all know this. We've talked about it. I don't know what happens in that world. So, you
have to be pretty hungry for card draw, and you have to be playing a commander that makes tokens and
probably creature tokens so that you can convoke it. So,
yeah, exactly. So it's tough. I mean, there are other commanders like Oskar, I think, like who theoretically could play it making artifact tokens, but you're not going to convoke it very easily, and like, it, you know what I mean? He could technically do it on other people's turns, so there like would maybe be a way.
But I think like the real advantage of the convoke is casting it with the convoke out of the command zone, right? Because that also goes with the command tax. So I don't think it's like I would put it.
It's not a bad commander.
Well, it's one of those things where it's like it's a mono white generic value engine, right? That has a lot of internal synergy with mono white. The question I guess I really have is because. So if I were to build this for cEDH, I would be like, okay, well, I'd probably want something like Heliod God of the Sun in the 99, right? Why am I not just playing that in the command zone at that point? And so I think that might be my question with this card. But otherwise, I think this has the potential to be a pretty good card coming out of the command zone. It just... I don't know. Maybe it needs somebody who is really dedicated to mono white and making those strategies work very well. I don't know anybody who would be up for that task, but you know.
Same.
Next card on our list is Grand Crescendo, which is an instant that costs X in 2 white. and it says create X11 green and white citizen creature tokens. And then creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. So, Fenix, when we were looking at this card, we were talking about this a little bit beforehand. It's kind of like, what's the green? You get indestructible. Your
heroic intervention.
Heroic intervention with like a mass. Brave the Sands attached to it.
Secure the Wastes.
Secure the Wastes. That's what it is.
It's like a cross between that and Secure the Wastes.
What is kind of your read on this card?
So, like, just like you said, those two cards, they've seen play in certain decks, and they're solid cards. This is somewhere in the middle of them, I would say. And so you need to be in a deck that probably cares about the non-human citizen tokens, which implies Winota. I don't think Winota would probably have a space for this in particular. It would probably want to play something like Flawless Maneuver instead if it was playing something like this, or Selfless Spirit, which triggers Winota by itself already. Yep. But it is an interesting card, especially for mono white, that it's another Selfless Spirit, in this case on an instant, that makes a bunch of bodies in the late game.
You can play this in your Bennie Bracks deck.
Yeah, exactly. It's a really solid mono white card, and it is pretty good in comparison to tools that already exist in green white. So I expect some amount of decks to pick this up. I don't know where it fits, though. It's kind of medium is my feelings on it.
Yeah, I just don't think it excels like in any place in particular is kind of the issue. Like, it's not as good as Secure the Wastes for the token making plan, where you have to pay an extra white mana and before you can convert into making warriors, and it's not as good as other options for protection. So it's sort of like a modal card in the sense that like it's versatile, but it's never going to be as good as a more dedicated slot. And so, yeah, I just don't think it's worth trading the efficiency if you wanted this effect for the versatility. That being said, at least the two modes here are really good. Conceivably, if you're playing the type of strategy that wants to to go wide with tokens.
Right.
Otherwise, it's just kind of protection.
The big thing I will say about this card that I do think is interesting, because here's the problem I see with it over all those things, is because I look at it and I go, okay, I'm probably going to play this in a deck where I care about my permanence on the board, right? So I want my automatically on something that's like a hate bears-y sort of, And so I think about the type of removal that is played in cEDH. And it tends to look like Toxic Deluge, the Meat Hook Massacre.
Bounce spells.
Toxrill, bounce spells, those sorts of things. We don't really see the like mass, like Supreme Verdict, Wrath of God of X that casual decks tend to see much more frequently. And so that's where I look at this and I go, this could be really good, but it needs a very specific environment to be good. Because like it being something that not only gives you more advantage on the board, and the fact that not only are you protecting your pieces, you're also making more pieces, I think is a plus. But because I don't think it's not going to stop the type of stuff that you care about in cEDH.
Yeah, I honestly think that what you're saying is almost a positive for the card compared to its peers in white, because those cards are all only protection, and this does let you start the rebuilding process if you care about the 1/1s. So like Jetmir would be something I would think of, where it cares about the number of things you end up with on board when it comes back to your turn.
Well, and that's kind of like what I would like. My point, right, is it needs a very specific environment to look to get the most value out of it, and otherwise, I think that it's going to underperform. But I don't think it's a bad card necessarily.
No, we wouldn't be talking about it otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah. It seems to be like, I don't even think it's milk toast necessarily. I think it's just one of those things where it's one of those weird little, it's a very fair card. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a strong blowout in casual though. Like you essentially make their board wipe not hit your board, and then you also get ahead. So like it is certainly a powerful card in the right context. It's just that I don't know that cEDH really operates on that axis at the current time, where you can really leverage this card for its full potential.
I would agree with that. Next card on our list is an enchantment. It's Smuggler's Share, which costs 2 colorless and a white. It says at the beginning of each end step, draw a card for each opponent who drew 2 or more cards this turn, then create a treasure token for each opponent who had 2 or more lands enter the battlefield under their control this turn. So it's interesting, Pongo, we were talking beforehand how it's like, this is actually like a pretty like reasonably high power card. Like it's a pretty strong card. But because it's white, people are immediately going to be like, oh, I got to put this in my stack. And it's actually really bad with stacks.
Sort of. I mean, I don't know that it's necessarily... The problem is that in a stacks deck, it's true that this is not actually like impacting the board. So it's just kind of a value card in a stacks deck. I think a lot of stacks decks currently are not operating on the axis of trying to fight people drawing additional cards. Some of them are. Some decks are playing Spirit of the Labyrinth, and you will see Notion Thief in other decks, and sometimes Narset. But for the most part, it's more into the rule of laws and the null rod type effects, and then kind of the more targeted specific hate bears and stuff like that. So I don't know that this is bad per se in stacks decks. People will still play their fetch lands in stacks decks, but like I just think you kind of have to evaluate this card more generally in the format, and I think it's hard to do that because it's not as explosive as a card like Rhystic Study, right? Which is like the obvious comparison, where Rhystic Study frequently comes down and will immediately either tax people for mana, or draw you a lot of cards, and it'll keep doing that. Here you are dependent on your opponents taking a game action that is not necessarily as base level as Rhystic Study, right? For this card to do its thing, they have to have already cast their spells. So Rhystic Study is going to see the first part of that, even before this ever does its thing, and that other thing, which is the drawing the additional card, is not even necessarily a guaranteed thing that people are going to be doing all the time. It's pretty safe to assume that people are going to be drawing cards, but not every deck has a draw engine in the command zone. Not every deck necessarily is relying on big burst card draw. I just think it's comparing it to Rhystic Study, it's always going to fall flat. Let's put it that way.
It is interesting in a deck like Jeskai Stoneblade, for instance, right? Where you have the rule of law out, you're looking to 1-for-1 a lot of stuff. If you're like, especially if they have like a Rhystic Study out, you're much more willing to just not pay for the Rhystic Study when you have this out, because they draw a card, you counter their thing on their turn, and then at the end step you draw a card. And so it's like you end up breaking even on that transaction, if that makes sense. Which is actually kind of really good for a deck that is looking to play like hard control, like where you 1-for-1 a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I feel the same way. That I don't think the card is very good in stacks decks mostly because of exactly what you're saying, Pongo. A lot of Sax decks want to be on Null Rod, non-basic land hate, fetch hate.
I don't know if that's necessarily that big.
You turn off half of your own card.
You do turn off half of the card, yeah. But that is the half of the card that is the easiest to play around.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily where Stacks wants to be in the first place. Is that like they don't want to be catching up on cards to the other decks. They want to be stopping people from winning the game, and this doesn't stop people from winning the game.
I think that's the biggest issue, right? And it doesn't even like strongly incentivize people to slow down their game plan either. Like Heuristic Study, at least, is going to, if you play it early enough, theoretically get people to pay extra mana, and that plays to your game plan where even if you're not drawing cards, at least they're not developing as quickly. Here, they're still going to develop their draw engines. You're not taxing that. In theory, it can slow them down if they kept their fetch lands in hand, or if, they're playing land ramp, which not a lot of decks do. But it's just as easy to imagine, at least for myself. I like to get my fetch lands out of my hand pretty early. I don't really hold on to them for Brainstorm anymore just because of Opposition Agent. I try to kind of yeet them out of my hand before I can get blown out. So like, if this comes down turn 1 and I have to crack fetch lands, it can be very impactful. But if it comes down later, it's going to be certainly that half of the card is a lot easier to play around. The drawing 2 cards per turn thing, I don't think people are going to stop doing that. Like, people are going to draw their extra cards. And that's pretty powerful. I think, Heuristic Study is more powerful earlier, and theoretically this is more powerful later on in the game. Where Heuristic Study, people can potentially start having mana to pay for it more consistently and still multi-spell. Here, as the game goes longer, it's more likely that people are going to be developing draw engines. But at the same time, like, it's like not that many games of cEDH actually go that long.
Right.
Whereas in casual, this card is a bomb. Like,
this card is gross.
Obscene. So this is like a new instant staple for casual white decks. Which is probably why it's selling for like $30-$40 or whatever it's selling for. Yeah. So like, because like land ramp, we got that in casual. Draw engines, we got that in casual, and like no one's going to not land ramp and give you a treasure. No one's not going to not draw extra cards, and like the game's going to go long enough to realize that value. So this could be a consideration in cEDH if your metagame tends, I think, towards longer games.
Yeah, I could see it in some mid-range decks. I honestly, it's a really powerful white card, but I don't know if many mono white decks I could see playing this. It's a little bit too low. It's too low impact.
Yeah,
for a mono white deck.
Yeah,
this is a really good card in like blue white decks that are like specifically reactive blue white decks that are going to be needing to refill their hands and are pretty okay with like I said at the top of this section, like 1-for-1ing stuff, if that makes sense. Like those are the decks that are probably going to get the most mileage out of this card, I imagine.
It is good enough with Fall of the Thran to make us put Fall of the Thran in Lavinia. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I see.
There's some cute stuff that you can do there
in low color white decks, where it's like kind of just better than an alternative, but it's not quite as good enough as like the card pool in like 4 and 5 colors and potentially even 3 colors.
Yeah, exactly.
I think so. It gets edged out.
I would think about it in Jeskai Stoneblade. I don't know if it would make the cut, but it's definitely
probably the other place.
It's like the one place where like the really the deck that I think of the most where I'm like, that is where I'm like, okay, of all the decks I have, this is probably where it fits the most. What would I play this over is then my question. And then that's where it's like, that's kind of always my consideration with new cards going into something is like, okay, so I want to play this. What is this going in over? And that's the real question. So who knows? But the next card on our list is a very interesting card. It is Into Deep, which is an aura enchantment, so you can play this with Arden. That costs 2 blue, and it has split second on it. And it says enchant creature, planeswalker, or clue. Enchanted permanent is a colorless clue artifact with the clue ability.
The clue ability.
It becomes a clue, and it loses all other abilities. So this is interesting. We talked last week about witness protection, Fenix. Where do you think this lines up against a card like witness protection?
I definitely think it's worse.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know how good or bad this card is. We don't get split second removal very often because Wizards is pretty scared of printing split second removal. So having some option for split second removal, if that's something you care about, is nice. But it's 2 mana for sorcery speed removal when we already have better removal options in blue. Is kind of where it lands for me, where it does hit there's Resculpt that hits artifacts and creatures, and this hits only creatures and planeswalkers.
I agree. And I think that's a very valuable point. It's like really easy to read split second on this card, and for whatever reason, get it into your head that like it also has flash, but it doesn't. It just means that it can't be countered essentially, except by like a counterbalance sort of type of effect. So yeah, it is still sorcery speed removal at the end of the day. 2 mana for sorcery speed removal. I mean, like if you're in blue-green and you're not already playing Kenrith's Transformation, I think you 100% are playing Kenrith Transformation first. Just because it cantrips, and that's like better than paying 2 blue pips and like your opponent can sacrifice their commander that you've like tried to turn off forever to like draw a card and put it back into the command zone. And I just think that like most of the rest of the blue creature removal suite is just better. Like the rapid hybridizations, the whatchamacallit, the one you mentioned before.
Even Mystic Subdual. Mystic Subdual is, I think, -2/0 and loses all abilities, and then Legitimate Business Person is 1 mana.
That's just what we're calling it now.
It's not the name of the card, but it is now the name of the card.
It is now the name
I
of
did
the
buy
card.
a play set of those as well. The
token?
Witness protection.
Oh. I haven't seen the token. There is a Legitimate Business Person token, right?
No.
Oh, that's a disappointment. I guess there wouldn't be because the creature doesn't become a token. Yeah.
Yeah.
It just changes its card type.
Just changes its name and it becomes Legitimate Business Person. I love that name. I think that's so funny.
It is a fun card. It's a good design for sure. This is a rare though. Wow. In any
it's a commander rare.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, so this is from the commander sets, like we said. Next card on the list is Mask of the Schemer, which is a card that Fenix really wanted in Lavinia.
So close. This card is so close.
It's an artifact equipment that costs 2 colorless and a blue. And it says whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, it connives X, where X is the amount of damage it dealt to that player. And it costs 2 to equip.
You could probably start on this one, Callahan. You're the one with opinions.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah. So, okay. I didn't like it in Lavinia because I think it's just a little overcosted for what Lavinia's doing.
5 mana for not actually drawing cards is a lot.
Yeah,
it's a lot. Now, the one thing I will say is Connive is probably one of the best new abilities that when I see it tacked on to a creature or an ability, and it's in blue-white, I will forever go, and
it's
go, maybe is this a Lavinia card? And for Lavinia, I don't think it quite makes the cut, and we discussed that at length.
It might be good enough. It's close.
The big issue is Lavinia. That's a lot of mana to be pumping into it for what it does, and I think the deck that really is going to take advantage of it the most, and it remains to be seen whether or not it will be able to take advantage of it, is our blue Arden decks. And I think Jeskai Stoneblade probably takes the best advantage of it, where you can put this on a Crom and you get 4 connive triggers, which makes Crom bigger because those stick around regardless of if the equipment is there or not. Mm-hmm. And so it's very powerful in that sense. The question, basically where I'm going to end up evaluating it on, is it is going to be the card that I kind of think of, like, I'll probably test it in the words.
There's a slot.
Embercleave stone, like Embercleave slot.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of where you're getting kind of the same mileage out of Embercleave that you are out of this. The benefit you get from this, though, is the draw. And again, like we were saying earlier, in a deck like Jeskai Stoneblade, where you're playing very traditional 1-for-1 control, card advantage, or any sort of card, even card selection, is very strong. So I would say in that regard, I think it's a card that if you are playing blue Arden decks, it's worth considering. I don't know if it makes the cut or not. But I think that it is a very strong option. And again, when you put it pair it with something like Sigarda's Aid, and now you get to start casting this on other people's turns and really conserving your spell slots at that point, then it gets even better. The one bonus that Embercleave has over this is that Embercleave can just be casted instant speed regardless. And so that is one of the advantages Embercleave does have, because there's a lot of combat tricks that you can end up doing, which is really fun with Embercleave.
I also think Embercleave is kind of just a guaranteed 3-turn clock, whereas this is
all over the place.
Yeah, it's not guaranteed at all. I mean, we've talked about this before, Fenix, about like the math on
with
Connive.
Like Ravine. Yeah,
it's really easy to overestimate how many counters you're going to get on things, because you're thinking, oh well, like the first time I hit with Crom, it's going to get 4 counters. It's like, no, you're probably going to draw a lot of lands, and you're probably going to want to discard off that first, like, draw 4, probably at least 2 lands. And then like the next one, probably, you're going to draw a few extra lands and probably want to discard those as well, because you want to keep your actual action. Whereas with Embercleave, like, you're hitting for 10 and then 10, and then you're deading them. If you manage to get 1 extra power on Crom, like in between the first and second attack, that's a 2-turn clock. And you're playing.
Well, and that's where it's just like, you're already playing stuff like SoFi, right? So it's like you get Sword of Fire and Ice on it. Like, as soon as you get Sword of Fire and Ice on Crom, the game's kind of over at that point. Honestly,
like Double Strike is so powerful. Like, I don't know if this is better than Embercleave.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. The other thought is we could try this over a card like Sword Hearth and Home, which is like probably the more mediocre of all of the equipment in the deck.
It's so much fun.
It is exactly.
It is so much fun.
It's probably the slot that if I were to take it out to put this in, that's probably the best slot to pull from it. But ramping is really good. Also, Gilded Draking people's boards is really fun, and
bouncing your dockside
is really fun. It enables a lot of Godo lines that you wouldn't have otherwise. And yeah, it's just one of those cards.
You're playing Goblin Engineer. It's like one of my first ever tutor targets, like every time I play Goblin Engineer. Yeah. Because then it's like, my Goblin Engineer gets every equipment in my deck.
Does the same thing with Stoneforge, too.
Yeah.
Yep. And your Stoneforge, like, I don't know. I don't know that this is good enough.
It's a really tough card to evaluate, to be honest, because Connive has this Well, it's looting. Well, it's mega looting. Well, how much more mega looting is it actually?
Right.
Yeah.
Or is it just looting?
And you don't have graveyard synergies in that deck, right? Because you're not playing Breach, because you're playing Rule of Law effects.
You're playing Rest in Peace.
You're playing
so,
Rest. Okay, well, the opposite.
So
yeah.
Like you're playing Rest in Peace. You're playing Rule of Laws. Like you have no graveyard synergies whatsoever.
Exactly. So Connive loses quite a bit of power.
Yeah. But I haven't really had a whole lot of opportunities to test new cards in Ardencrom yet. Just because I've been spending a lot of time with the Rector stuff because of the fact that Vivian has made my life actually completely obnoxiously difficult because now I have to find lines in Sans Red with Vivian, and
that is tough.
It's a
I
pain in the
have tried
ass.
to do the Sans Red like Kiki Pod sort of stuff because obviously there was like a lot of appeal trying to find those types of lines for Derevi, and
it ends up just being
they're not great.
It ends up just being like your Arena Rector is just a second tutor to like another way of getting out your Academy Rector. It just is makes it more consistent, which is good, and that deck needed it regardless. But that's what I've been spending a lot of time working on, that and other variants of the like Rector like archetype in general right now, because there's a lot of build up around that card or around the Rectors because of Vivian. But moving on to the next card on our list is Body Count. It is an instant that costs 2 colorless and a black that says draw a card for each creature that died under your control this turn, and it has a spectacle cost of just black. And for those of you who were not with us for Ravnica, the third time we went, the return to Ravnica, Spectacle is you may cast the spell for its spectacle cost rather than its mana cost if an opponent lost life this turn. And being an instant, and we're in cEDH, it's fairly likely that that's going to trigger. So I don't know. Pongo, what are your thoughts on this card? We in our notes we kind of look at it. Maybe it's a Dargo card. I don't know.
So it's a little awkward, even in something like Dargo, just because there's sort of like two directions people take Dargo right now. One of them is not particularly good, and that's the one where like you deal combat damage with Dargo and like draw cards equal to the amount of damage, and that's like pretty inconsistent. It's much better when you can kind of like play Dargo and then immediately do the thing and draw a bunch of cards and kind of keep storming off that way. So this kind of expects you to have a sack outlet out, because for this to really generate a lot of value with Dargo, you need to sacrifice him a bunch. So maybe if you're doing like the Dargo Infinite Death, combos using the Altar, Phyrexian Altar, like maybe you could consider it there, because then you can just kill Dargo an arbitrary amount of times and kind of draw your deck. I know like Reed is, for example, not even doing that in his Naya Dargo deck.
Right.
Reed is just instead using the cards that sacrifice Dargo and draw you cards. And this is kind of like a little bit win more, I guess, right? In that respect, because like all of your sack outlets with Dargo in that deck already, I think, draw you a bunch of cards. And I think that's how most Dargo decks work. Or they're looking to sacrifice Dargo to put like a Razaketh into play. By like potting up into Razaketh or something like that, which is already just going to be much more powerful than using this as kind of like a fair type of card. So I'm not so sure that this is a Dargo card. I think that Dargo has enough redundancy, or would at least rather play like the stronger Dargo synergies than this. This is
Nathan, I know you're watching. Tell
piece.
us if you're considering this card or not. Just leave the comment. I know you're watching, so just tell us.
And otherwise, like Dargo is kind of just doing like Nas stuff. That's like
the
other way, like sort of like the Jund Dargo style decks, where you can also play a few Dargo enabling cards because you're gonna have a ton of stuff to sacrifice Dargo, and you can kind of turn it again into almost like a second Nas, where it's a smaller one, but hopefully it builds you towards the Pier or the Nas that comes after it, sort of thing. So yeah, not for Dargo, but I could see this in like Chatterfang, which like there is a Chatterfang Nas deck. I think Killstar's Brood, for example, and that deck when it's doing its fair thing, has like a lot of tokens that it will sacrifice, and you do have a creature
draw
with
a lot of cards
with Forest Walk, so it's really easy to enable the Spectacle, which was I didn't even mention that, but like with the Dargo deck, you would still need to enable Spectacle, otherwise this is 3 mana and not 1. So like yeah, I guess with Chatterfang this is an option.
The only other thing I have on the notes is maybe you can tutor for this with Razaketh and draw a bunch of cards if you need to refill your hand, but
yeah, but like
you have Razaketh and a tutor.
You have
right?
Razaketh and a tutor, which sometimes is not enough in like some decks, but in many decks is the lines have kind of gotten good enough that would be enough. If you can Razaketh like into Dockside, into who knows what, like it kind of almost doesn't even matter at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so like I don't know. I think that this is a very niche card. And there's one deck, at least off the top of my head, that I can maybe see it being played in. It is another like just straight outlet, I guess, if you can do the Chatterfang combos, which do normally need an outlet. You need to have like a Blood Artist type of effect or something else to take advantage of infinite mana or like just infinite bodies in play, something like that. And this can do it. So
this is a World Gorder Dragon outlet if you squint hard enough.
if you squint very hard, and if you clench your butt cheeks hard enough too.
Yeah,
it is an instant at least.
Yeah. I am. This is totally off topic. I'm literally just sitting here looking at the cards that I got in the mail the other day, and just I don't know what compelled me to buy a play set of Ledger Shredders, but I'm just so glad that I did. Like $3 for this play set, like that's $40 now, makes me feel very good.
Oh man. The highs are high, but imagine Callahan if the card ever falls back down in price.
I mean, I bought them for 70 cents. Victory. I'll be like, whatever. Like, I have a playset of them, I guess. But anyhow, next card on our list is a card that I actually think is a lot better than people give it credit for. And this is Lethal Scheme. It's an instant that costs 2 colorless and 2 black that does have Convoke. And it says destroy target creature or planeswalker. Each creature that convoked a Lethal Scheme connives. And so we were talking a little bit before the show that where I see this being really good is specifically in like an Abzan Stacks shell, where you're already playing stuff that's on the board. You're playing a lot of abilities that are going to, you're probably more concerned about combat than other decks. And this is going to be a good thing that's going to be able to not only give you some card selection, but also be able to enable some of your graveyard strategies that you might have going on. It can pump your team. There's a lot of options with this, which I think is really nice. And I think it is better. First of all, people need to be playing more removal, period, full stop. Because one of the notes that we did have was that people aren't even playing the good removal that they should be playing. But I think this is just another tool in people's tool belts for those style of decks. I don't know. I mean, what do you guys think? Phoenix, what are your thoughts?
I am pretty far on the opposite side of you. I don't think this card is anywhere close, to be honest, is my honest opinion on it. I think that if Convoke removal was good in our format, people would be playing Stoke the Flames already. And other than literally Magda, which cares about the Convoke tapping the creatures, I can't think of anything that plays Stoke the Flames as a comparison to this. And it kills most relevant creatures. And the mega looting if you Convoke is not a big enough upside for me to consider something that I probably wouldn't want to be playing anyways. Just at 4 mana being a lot.
I would tend to agree.
I don't know. I think being able to connive in black is really strong, especially if you're in like Sans blue, where your card advantage is already not as great as other people. But I don't know.
Yeah, and I think we talked about this beforehand too, but if you're a Tymna deck, you're never tapping Tymna to cast this, so it doesn't really count towards the cost.
Yeah, you might not even have that many untapped creatures, because theoretically you might be using them to attack multiple opponents. Yeah, it's just tough to imagine having enough black creatures for this to be free consistently. Like untapped ones in particular. So I think, I wouldn't be surprised to see it costing 1 black mana a good amount of the time. And then, you get to connive 3. Like, that's not terrible. 4 mana on, so you're not going to probably play it in Nas decks just because it's 4 mana. At least, Nas sees 4 mana.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so, maybe... And also creature count matters a lot. So maybe you would play it in kind of like the Abzan Stacks type of decks.
Right.
I just don't know that those decks are looking for another piece of removal because they had plenty of options before, plenty of pretty reasonable options, and they weren't playing them over other stuff. Occasionally you would see that piece of removal that you can pay. I think it costs only 2 mana if you let an opponent draw a card.
Baleful Mastery.
Yeah, Baleful Mastery. But that, why do they play that? Well, because you can yeet an Oracle player out of the game, right? It's almost more for that than it is for just having the piece of removal.
It's also exile,
and exile removal is stronger for sure. So yeah, I don't know. I think that it's just maybe if you wanted an extra piece of removal, you could consider it. And if you're playing a deck like that has enough creatures, maybe you could consider it. But I'm not particularly excited about the card.
Yeah, fair enough. Next card on the list is we haven't seen one of these cards since Amonkhet, so it's been a while. But it is an Aftermath card. It's Indulge to Excess, which the Indulge portion is a 2 colorless and a red sorcery that says whenever a creature you control attacks this turn, create a 1/1 green and white citizen creature token that's tapped and attacking. The Aftermath side of it, let me just turn my head here so I can read it. You have to cast that from your graveyard, right? And it costs 1 colorless and a blue sorcery. Create a treasure token for each creature you control that dealt combat damage. This is so hard to read. Combat damage to a player this turn. So Pongo, this, obviously, insert John Mulaney meme here. Is this a on fire garbage can or is it a Najeela card?
Did you notice that I rotated the picture, Callahan?
There you go.
Did you?
Yeah, I rotated it for you.
Oh, you beautiful. Oh man, I fucked that up really bad. Okay.
Oh no.
Oh, now
all
it's
that hard
squished.
work.
Oh my gosh.
You ruined it, Callahan.
Our notes are going crazy.
This is not. I'm just gonna say this is unfortunately not a Najeela card. When we first saw it, we had a brief moment of excitement because it kind of looks like on the surface that it might be good enough, right? You pay 3 mana, you kind of get a pseudo Najeela activation. It's not really because they're not warriors. Turns out that makes a really big difference. And then you can cast the Aftermath part and presumably make a bunch of mana. But to do all that in one turn, I think you already have to be on your second combat or your third combat. So So that means that it's like probably turn 4 or turn 5. And then you're like netting 1 mana if you do it all in 1 turn, which is like pretty poor. It's like maybe a little bit better if you split it up where, you do 3 mana, make a couple of extra warriors, and then on the a couple of extra creatures, and then on the subsequent turn you pay 2 mana and like make a bunch of treasures. But like, still not great. Feels a little win more ultimately, and I think that's kind of the issue with a lot of cards like this.
Yeah, Fenix, you had thoughts on it. What's your
my thoughts are in the notes. It's if we didn't have the front half of this card would be instant stable in the format. Just 1 in a red sorcery, make a bunch of treasures after combat. That's great Magic card.
Yeah, because in Najeela, I mean, it would be on your first combat, you could pay 2 mana and bank 2 treasures, which is not great. But like it scales after that to be a pretty powerful ritual.
Right.
Yeah. It could be interesting.
Just even like going as a +1 ritual with treasures if you hit 3 people. Still pretty solid. But unfortunately it is an aftermath card, and so there's also, for what it's worth, if this does matter, because you could potentially people could potentially think that you can attempt to use this with Breach. Aftermath exiles the card no matter what.
Right.
Even if you're casting it with Breach, for example, Aftermath will cause the card to be exiled. So, unfortunately.
Yep. Next card on our list, however, is the first commander we're going to be talking about here. And it's, what's his name? The Maestro's right-hand man, Angelo the Painter, which costs blue, black, and red. Legendary vampire assassin that is 1/3 with death touch. And it says the first instant or sorcery spell you cast each turn has casualty 2. And for those of you who are unaware of what casualty is as you cast that spell, you may sacrifice a creature with power 2 or greater. When you do, copy the spell, and you may choose new targets for the copy. So we're talking about this in the context of it's a generic Grixis commander, right? Fenix, when it really comes to like Grixis, how many 2 power or more creatures are they playing that they're going to be willing to sacrifice?
There's not a ton. I mean, you get your Dragon's Rage Channeler pumped up, and then you can sacrifice it, or if you have some pump on some of your creatures. But a lot of the generic Grixis creatures are not going to be power 2, and then also with casualty, you can't sacrifice 2 1-power creatures. You need 1 2-power creature. So unfortunately, I think this ranks lower than any of the existing Grixis Mean Girls.
Grixis Mean Girls.
I had to make the joke, but it is interesting that the commander can double copy Tainted Pact sometimes. But I don't think that it's anything extremely exciting for me, at least.
I mean, we said that about, what was it, Maestro's Ascendancy last week, right, Pongo? Where it's like, is double Tainted Packing really something that, like, especially in these decks, like, you can already do that with Kess, right? Like, why do we need... What does this present that makes it better?
A creature?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't even sacrifice Angelo, like, because he only has 1 power. So, like, you need to sacrifice something else. So you have to play a bunch of creatures in your Grixis deck to enable that ability. Which
you can sack a Ragavan.
It just has so much so much internal tension, right? Because Grixis, in the card, wants you to be playing a bunch of instants and sorceries so that you can get more impact out of them, but it also wants you to be playing creatures that you can sack to said instants and sorceries. And those two things don't usually go together very well. And it's very interesting. Yeah, in cEDH.
In cEDH. Because we were talking about this before we hit the record button too. This is actually pretty cool and casual, where you can imagine sacrificing, like a Bloodghast and recurring it. and other small creatures that are easily recurred and oftentimes have like 2 power. Like there's like a lot of zombies, and then you would be playing a lot of high impact instants and sorceries, and that seems like actually a pretty cool deck. Like I actually kind of enjoy, the journey this card puts you on. It kind of feels like a little bit like a Jaleva, but you're hiding more information because it's all in your hand, and so like your opponents don't necessarily start freaking out after like the second you flip into all those things, and you're not like free casting, so it's a little fairer, a lot fairer, I should say. So I don't know, it's a cool card, but for all the reasons you talked about, this is not really quite good enough in the Grixis pantheon.
Yeah, it just doesn't get there. It's interesting and casual. I mean, it's nice that this doesn't care about where you cast the card from. But
when we talked about this last week, one of the things that I really like about Evelyn is that it fixes that problem that Pongo and I have talked about before with like 3 colors, where once you print single color and 2 color partners, you kind of run into this issue of like, okay, well, why will I ever play a single commander when I can play 2 commanders that are easier to cast? And you have Evelyn, which kind of fixes that issue to some extent, or has a much more flexible casting cost. And then you look at this and it's like the complete opposite issue, where it has a very hard, like a much tougher casting cost in blue, black, red, which I think is interesting. But moving on to the next commander on our list is Trivet, Seller of Secrets, which is a legendary Sphinx rogue that is a 6/6 that costs 3 colorless, a white, blue, and black, and it has flying and ward 3. And it has the ability Council's Dilemma. Whenever Trivet enters the battlefield or deals combat damage to a player, starting with you, each player votes for evidence or bribery. For each evidence vote, investigate. For each bribery vote, create a treasure token. While voting, you may vote an additional time. So it says time sieve exclamation mark here. So Fenix, walk us through exactly what's going on with time sieve here.
So when you attack someone in a game of EDH, you have 4 people voting plus your extra vote, which means you get 5 artifacts, which is exactly the number you need to sacrifice to time sieve. Pretty cool that the commander just combos with time sieve.
Right.
There are some issues with that, like this being 6 mana and this needing to actually connect. So if one person has cast a Swan Song in the game, you might not be able to win.
Right.
But it's pretty cool that there's a 1-card combo in this deck.
Bigger issue is if one of your opponents died already, right? Because then you only make 4. I mean, you probably have other artifacts lying around, and you do have other enablers to get around that. But like, I agree with the sort of main issues you highlighted, being the high CMC, and I don't know if you touched upon it, but like a lot of the time, making a ton of clue tokens can actually be kind of a big issue,
right?
And like it can really like come back to bite you in the ass, because they're not as easy to get rid of as treasures, which like you can get rid of for free if you need to. They kind of are stuck in play, and you make a lot of them, and then your opponent's dock sides are just absurd.
Right.
Like, I think when Reed was playing this against us, those games where he was playing Trivet, there was the one that I think he won. Oh no, there was one he almost won, but then
and then I think he ran into an issue.
There. I think
with somebody having a blocker or something.
I think it was his Nas didn't get there. Or no, it was he consulted, I think, and pretty much like killed himself on his consult going for time sieve, I think. So other than that one game, I'm pretty sure the rest of them were just like dockside coming down and just like feasting on all of these random artifacts lying around. So that's like pretty dangerous to do if you can't really commit him to the board for value. When your opponents are probably all voting for evidence, you're voting, I think, more often than not, bribery twice to get 2 treasure tokens, so that he effectively costs 4 mana, kind of. But then you're stuck with like 3 clue tokens that, in addition to all of your fast mana that you used to ramp into him, make Docksides like thick.
Right. It's very interesting. Like I think the time sieve thing is like cute, but I think that's like it, right? It's cute. And I think that's about as far as it goes. I don't see a whole lot of benefit to it overall, because it feels like that's fairly easy to disrupt. Am I incorrect in that assessment?
It's along the lines of something like, I think, is the other giant Esper commander that some people play, Yennet? Is that the one?
Oh, yeah, sure.
That casts, it's along the lines of that, where you have a strange deck building restriction that does something unique and may not be the best in the world, but at least it is unique.
It does a thing.
I mean, the thing that Yennet does is arguably a little bit more powerful, if only because, it casts Peer. You have to set it up on the top of your deck, which is like really not that hard. We have like a lot of tutors that, conveniently tutor the thing to the top of the deck in this format. And being less mana also helps. The one upside Trivet has is that once Trivet lands, it's really hard to get rid of Trivet because of Ward 3. That is a big tax on any removal that you would use on Trivet. But at the same time, you just use the removal on the time sieve, right? So it's kind of like you can still disrupt those combos pretty easily.
Right.
I think Raffine is kind of really giving a lot of Esper commanders the run for run for their money and a hard time these days. Yeah. Like Raffine is very, very powerful, and it's hard for me to imagine playing an Esper commander that's not either Raffine or Zur, currently. Or
I honestly, after playing against Raffine, I can't imagine playing any Esper deck that is
any
not
other
Raffine,
Esper deck? Yeah.
Period.
Raffine feels like your style of deck.
Yeah, it's my
It does
exact
a really cool thing.
It does a cool thing. It's very much a play creature, attack, and then sit back on the mountains of cards that you just acquired.
It's a mid-range deck, yeah.
Yeah, it's my type of bullshit.
So mid-range.
So I obviously really like Raffine. But yeah, it just feels like when you look at Raffine, especially in the context of cEDH, I feel like it's invalidated a lot of Esper commanders. And I think you could almost argue it's pretty damn close to almost making it gives you a reason to not just play Timna Malcolm in Esper. Where remember we had that previous with the Grixis commander we were talking about, is how it's like, okay, well, why don't I play, Malcolm Vile or whatever? And with this, it gives you like a really good incentive of here's why you play this over Timna Malcolm. And I really like Raffine. I think Raffine's so good.
And she's very open-ended. She does a lot of different stuff, which is quite cool.
You can play it however you want.
I think if she was 4 mana, she would be less centralizing, but at 3 mana too, it's
very aggressively
very easy to turn 2 of her. Yeah.
In Ward 1 is not irrelevant, by the way. It's Word is weirdly difficult to get around, believe it or not. But
it's not Ward 3, but Ward 1 is not nothing.
Yeah. It's one of those weird things where it's because when people are at certain points where they're strapped on mana and they only have maybe 1 or 2 mana left, trying to remove the Raffine is a lot harder because of the fact that it's making you now pay an extra mana.
And it has exactly the thorn effect, which is not it's not keeping you from doing the first one, it's keeping you from casting your next spell.
Right.
So it makes it harder to double spell. Ward 3 feels like much closer to like actual factual hexproof by comparison, whereas Ward 1 kind of just feels like you've almost silenced yourself after using your removal, but like at least you could cast your removal.
Yeah. I will say I do think Raffine's really bad with rule of laws because of that. But we're not talking about Raffine right now. Last card on our list is a card that we saw in Raffine. If you watched our stream, not yesterday, but last week on Team Turn 3, is Oskar Rubbish Reclaimer. It is a legendary human wizard that's a 3/3 that costs 3 colorless, a blue, and a black. And it says the spell costs 1 less to cast for each different mana value among cards in your graveyard. Whenever you discard a non-land card, you may cast it from your graveyard. So, Pongo, this is basically 4 mana off of a Jeweled Lotus.
Yeah,
because it just ends up reducing its cost 1. Like you crack the Jeweled Lotus, and then you just pay 1, and you're there, right? Like it.
Yeah, you can Jeweled Lotus into this for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's the turn 1 play. You get it off a Jeweled Lotus, like any 3-drop commander. And there's like a lot of ways to do this on turn 2. Also, like with fetch lands and stuff like that. So this card has actually really impressed me. And when I first saw it, I thought, oh, it's good. But I was like, I don't know where it'll see play.
Right.
And then, seeing it in action, I've been impressed by how consistent that cost reduction ability is.
Yeah.
It feels like it's really easy to play this card for only 2 mana in many situations. And then the Containment Construct ability is like pretty surprising in the sense that it's templated, and this was kind of something that I guess we all missed. It lets you cast things around timing restrictions, which is like crazy, because like initially like you don't necessarily think like, oh yeah, this means that like in my cleanup step I get to just discard cards and cast them, but like you do get to do that.
It also doesn't exile them. They just go right back to the graveyard.
They stay in the graveyard, which is also relevant for a lot of different things you'd want to be doing in blue and black. So this card has been kind of maybe one of the cards that, at least so far, has most. My opinion of it was decent when I first saw it, and I thought it was a fine card. But then seeing it in action, I feel like it's quite a bit better than my initial impression of it was. So, part of that is I think that there's like a very strong inherent synergy with like Raffine and all of the mega looting you're doing.
Right.
But it's not hard to also just imagine building around these synergies of discarding cards, looting, or just, doing any kind of, milling for the discount effect, and then discarding off of big draw effects. Like it's easy to actually enable this card.
This card's really gross with Doomsday and also with Divining Witch. Unfortunately, the ordering of how you would discard a Thassa's Oracle to Divining Witch would not let the triggers and the ability resolve in the order you want, but that's fine. It's really good with like Labman or like Lab Jace, and then you just discard them to a Divining Witch and win.
Yeah,
right.
I still think that like
things like that.
It's possible that there's not like a lot of places where you would play this card, just because it is kind of asking you to do a much more mid-rangey type of thing. But in Raffine specifically, it has been surprisingly good.
Yeah.
It's probably up there, in my opinion, in the like blue-black only commanders. It's up there in power level.
As a commander, yeah.
As a commander.
As a commander, it's also reasonable. But
right.
I don't know if it's like as good as some of the other blue-black options that we've gotten recently.
Right.
But, the cost reduction is really powerful still. and that is a powerful ability. It's just that in blue-black, I feel like a lot of the time you want an outlet, just because like your combos are often not going to be as good as just like going into higher colors, and potentially having the same card pool plus, and like theoretically also just having an outlet in the command zone at the same time. So like I think there's just like a lot of pressure on your commander to fill in like a lot of the question marks for what your deck is doing if you're choosing to forego colors.
Right. No, I think that's entirely fair. I don't know. It feels more like a 99 card to me personally.
Yeah, same.
I think it's much stronger in the 99 of decks than it is out of the command zone, because it's just like I guess my question is it okay, so blue black commander, okay, what is this doing that's better than Kel's? What is this doing that's better than like it's not a scepter outlet.
Even Toxrill, yeah.
Right, or Toxrill, right? And so it's like it's one of those things where it's like, so it's just, is this better than Sig as a blue black commander? I think this is a 99 card personally. What'd you say?
It's kind of its own unique. You would maybe play like a Necro list or like a Wheels list with this, where it's just like you wheel and then you throw the cards in your hand on the table and etc.
Right. Strong synergy with LED.
True.
Yeah.
Sort of, in a weird way. I mean, I guess not so much if you're playing counter spells, but
yeah.
But you know, if you're playing a lot of fast mana and other stuff, yeah.
It's certainly a card that I will be interested to see how it does.
Plays in
Very good with
you want
that
a lot
mask,
of looting effects.
Actually.
Yeah.
So Rafine is the natural home for the card.
Right.
Especially in a more mid-rangey, like not Nas-centric Rafine deck.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
maybe
really
like Farina as well. Farina could play it. Any kind of blue-black X.
Who's even playing Farina anymore?
Pretty good with
right?
Armix.
Like you've got.
You could play it in Armix too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That actually.
Then you turn all of your cards into, well, they can be a removal spell, and then you still cast them.
Right. Yeah, that seems actually like a really good home for it, believe it or not. But yeah, that is all of our cards that we have here for Streets of New Capenna Commander set review. And there was a lot of some new interesting things, some things that were okay. We'll see where they have it happen. But kind of like we said with our main set review is we saw that there was a lot of very support going to very specific places. You know what I mean? Like we didn't see, like Pongo said at the recap at the end of last episode, the big like shift up in power, right? That like a Commander Legends or something brings. Mm-hmm. But we saw support to particular archetypes. And I think the Commander set just kind of reinforces that, you know. Fenix, what are your final thoughts here on the set as we wrap up?
There's a lot of commanders out of all of this product that are really exciting and at least do unique enough things to where I don't feel like I'm losing any commanders in the pool of commanders at this point, and instead we're just getting more cool ones.
Yeah.
And so feel great about that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm finally over the sort of power deflation of these commander products. It's hard for an old timer like me who remembers the days of when, you know, commander sets were pretty much like always gonna make like some kind of massive change to the format because like something obscene would get printed. You know, I think Wizards has gotten a lot better in terms of balancing for a commander. And so there was certainly a period of time where it spoiled my excitement for commander products. But you know, having lived with it for a while now, I'm pretty glad. And you know, there's no shortage of like stupid cards that are getting printed in other products as well.
Right.
But I guess we'll be back probably for the next set that, you know,
whichever one they decide to do next. I don't know if we actually know for sure.
Well, I think we're supposed to be getting spoilers for the Commander Legends set pretty soon.
Yeah, Commander Legends. Spoilers start in 2 weeks, so we'll be
that. that is the set where I would expect to see potentially a few nuttier cards entering into the format. So I'm excited for that one.
So here's my big question before we go. So this is going to come out after you've played your MLC games. And you're playing, let's see, game 1, you're going 3rd. You're playing Sultai midrange. Game 2, you're going 2nd. You're playing Kenris Stacks. Pongo, what do you expect the outcome this weekend to be? If when this comes out, you're saying this beforehand, so you got to hopefully have some good forward-thinking retrospection. What is your thoughts on the weekend?
Just on my matches, like how I think they're gonna go. I'm gonna win it, baby. Let's go. It's either I win or Sick Robot smooth talks Ian into letting him win. Those are my predictions.
Wow.
You aren't first, you're last.
That's fair.
I don't know why I said Ian specifically, but I had to say someone.
Wow.
And sorry, Ian, you got singled out. This is probably like the second video in a row where Ian is going to be furiously typing in the comments, "Why are you talking about me?"
Oh, that's funny. It'll be interesting, but so week 1 will have been over this past weekend. Next weekend will be the second week, which will be all of the Gatewatch players, so definitely tune in to Monarch to see all of that. But with that, thank you for joining us. This has been a great episode, and it's been a pleasure to have you all along. Before we take off, I do want to thank a couple of our high-tier patrons of Justin, Michael Levine, CZ, David Snavely, Dianaches, Jason Bialik, Matt Boehner, and Senior Coupon. If you too would like to become a patron and help support the show, you can head on over to patreon.com/The Mind Sculptors, or you can check out the link in the description as well. Thank you again for joining us, and from all of us here at The Mind Sculptors, I'm Callahan, and we'll see you next time.
I'm in line with the stars, I'm in sync with the earth. 10 toes deep, flower child from the turf. I never switch sides, like even when I die, I'ma ride for the squad, light up tires in the hearse. I've been on a vibe, kinda hard to describe. I'm in between, I'm good and it's fine, but I'm tired of the grind. Then I come alive in the night to realize I'm in the middle of the time of my life. I'm never so packed for the stack, never lied on the rap. Got a bag from the way that I write it. Queen looking Tyson, through that I survived, doing 80 to the house. Then I hit it to the sky, changed haters on a tirade. Talking to their grip in the face, be still, let that hate stuff fade. We all want the same, we all want a meal in the safe. I wanna live like I'm trying to reach enlightenment. Trail spill from my lips, feel bent from the bib. Take a sip till I pass out. Try and get grit, but it don't make sense, cause you can lose life on this fast route. Yeah, turn thoughts to a cash cow. I might flip that to the glass house. I don't need the accolades, I'm in love with the chase. I just wanna eat, save a spot at the table. Beats with the slap, pin myself on the map. You long with the wind, but we knowing that it's cap. 5-hour flights, couple nights at the